to 3 minutes at 180, going right into 3 minutes at 200. So your speed's going to get a little faster as you go through. So you'll feel the push. There are a lot of proper nouns in here. So you'll need the 160 to get warmed up. Okay, ready? Since they have no evidence that violence wasn't planned, the way they argue is that they say Bach, Fripoli, and Oplepik and Pearson lied. They state that they lied categorically. They said because Bach, Fripoli, Pearson, and Oplepik were undercover agents for the police or newspapers, and therefore they cannot be honest men. Now, how dare anybody argue that kind of a gross misstatement? Some of the bravest and the best men of all the world, certainly in law enforcement, have made their contributions while they were undercover. That statement is a libel and a slander on every FBI agent, every federal narcotics agent, every single solitary policeman who goes out alone and unprotected into some dangerous area of society to try to find out information that is helpful to his government. It is a slander on every military intelligence man, every Navy intelligence man who does the same thing. There is something that is very interesting, and I bet you haven't noticed it. The August 9th meeting. You remember that meeting was at mobilization headquarters. There was a lot of talk and a lot of planning at that meeting. Fripoli, Bach, and Oplepik were all there. So were Dellinger, Davis, Hayden, Weiner, Freunds, and Hoffman. All three of the government witnesses testified that the march routes to the amphitheater were discussed. All agreed that the dangers of the march routes were discussed. All agreed that the mill-ins in the loop were planned during the week. Disruptions, blocking cars driving down the street, smashing windows, shut the loop down, generally make havoc in the loop area, setting small fires, and by the way, it all happened. All of these things that I just mentioned happened on Wednesday of the convention week, and all of them happened in the downtown area right at Michigan and Balbo. You know, they were saying, what did they plan that happened? Well, everything. That was a pretty good shot on the first big meeting. In addition to the defendants, who else was there at that meeting? Bassiano, Radford, Baker, Steve Buff, and about 8 other people. Where are they? If Bach and Fripoli and Oplepik were lying, why weren't they in here testifying that something else was said at that meeting, or that Davis was telling the truth about what he said was said at that meeting? Where are they? Buff took the witness stand, and they didn't even ask him about the meeting. They didn't even ask him. The reason that none of the friends and pals of these defendants that were at those meetings didn't come in here and testify, or if they did, ignored the meetings, was because Bach, Fripoli, and Oplepik were telling the truth, and if they talked about those meetings on the witness stand, they would have no choice. They would either have to back Bach and Fripoli and Oplepik, or they would have to lie. They were at those meetings planning and organizing for the violence that they were going to instigate and incite in Chicago. And when all that organizing and planning was completed, the time to start the execution of the plan had arrived. The first thing they had to do is they had to keep this crowd of people getting excited, getting into trouble, but not so much trouble that they would run into a mass arrest situation before Wednesday, because they needed the crowd on Wednesday if they were going to have their big confrontation. And so what they decided, and stop and think of it, remember, at the beginning of this case they were calling them by all these names, Rennie and Abby and Jerry, trying to pretend they were young kids, these highly sophisticated, highly educated men, every one of them. They're not kids. Davis, the youngest one, took the witness stand. He is 29. These are highly sophisticated, educated men, and they are evil men. What they have in mind, they need to be sophisticated for, and they need to be highly educated for. Because what they have in mind is what Davis told you he had in mind. It is no judgment of mine. Davis told you from that witness stand after 2.5 days of the toughest cross-examination I was ever involved in, because he was so smart and so clever and so alert. But at last he told you, revolution, insurrection, and he told you, I am not. You heard it right from the witness stand. And so these sophisticated men decided that the first thing that they had to do was to test the police. They had to find out what they could do, where they would be stepping too far, you know, where they would run into trouble. So first they march. They had on Sunday, they sent the whole, most of them went down opposite the Hilton Hotel. They had an orderly legal march. legal picketing, and there was absolutely no trouble. Remember Davis back at that August 9 meeting? We'll lure the McCarthy kids and other young people with music and sex and try to hold the park. And all of this was done the first night. The first night they carried out the plan. But to carry out the big plan, they had to generate more heat the next day so that by Wednesday, the psychological training ground of this crowd and the psychological torture of the police, that combination would have reached the proper mix for what I think they had in mind for Wednesday night. Say you're in the park after 11 p.m. and the law says you're supposed to go. A policeman says leave. You say hell no. He has only two choices, doesn't he? He either has to walk away from you and not enforce the law, or he has to use whatever physical force is necessary to make you leave. So he reaches down. Say he takes you by the arm. Then what do? You scream, let me alone, let me alone, police brutality. And you start wrestling around. Then he again has only two choices. Either he has to physically subdue you right there on the spot, or he had to help get order to carry you out. If the police get tough and wrongfully, and it is wrong for policemen to say, this man is not going to go, so he cracks him. That is wrong. He shouldn't do that. But say he does it, which they do, policemen do that, and then the crowd takes that as total justification to attack the police with rocks and bottles and to say we are defending ourselves. The technique is simple, and it can fit any situation, and you have seen it fit situations in this courtroom. Somebody violates the regulation of this courtroom, and the marshal asks him to leave, and he won't, so he takes him by the arm. Dirty, rotten marshal, and that had happened, and that is the way it is done, and it is done. You know, this is done in complicated situations and in simple situations. Monday night in Lincoln Park, as the curfew approached, there was Reuben. Arm yourselves with anything you can. Now is the time to make our stand. Earlier, he had been doing the same thing. That is the night they built the barricade, just like they planned on August 9th. It was a rough night in the park. There was gas. Davis is there on the bullhorn. He is shouting encouragement to the crowd. Fight the pigs, hold the park, committing a criminal act, by the way, inciting a crowd. He had just left his cohort, Hayden, downtown, who had been arrested near the Hilton. Reuben, as usual, was in the park on Tuesday. He gives a speech to the crowd, telling them to take this country away from the people who run it. Take the streets in small groups, just as he told Pearson that the Viet Cong had done, and he finished up his revolution with "See you in the streets." These are criminal acts. They are urging people to violence. Seal followed on the podium with a wild speech telling the crowd to get their pieces and barbecue that pork. Are we supposed to wonder, it doesn't mean what it means? That is what the argument is. It doesn't mean what it means. Of course you know what it means. You get your gun and you kill a policeman. That is what it means. It is as obvious as anything from the context of that speech. You heard the whole speech. To say anything else is ridiculous. It is calling black white. Up at the park again Tuesday night, over and over again, the police were saying, clear the park, clear the park. Finally, at 12:30, the police moved forward again. And again, they were met with a hail of missiles. This time, Freunds was right up in the front line throwing rocks and stones himself. The police really let them have it with the tear gas that night. They had a dispenser, and there was a lot of gas, and the crowd got out quickly. I don't know. Maybe that is a better way, but I don't know. There was a lot of gas. It is a temporary bad feeling, but at least nobody gets hurt. Maybe it is a better way. The battle plan had been talked about by Davis on August 9th. It was almost ready. Young people had been moved into the park. They fought and resisted the police. And now the time had come to start shifting the scene down to the downtown area, and just as they had planned, the Hilton area was going to be the focus of the next action.